So we have some workshop goals today. They're few, but we only have an hour. So the first is we want to begin drafting key parts of the application. Now that doesn't necessarily mean we'll have time to flesh out what you will actually be submitting, but part of the process is getting started on these initial steps. So we'll be going over some drafting key parts. And then we'll be looking at the application process from the reviewer's perspective specifically, and some, again, not going over the guidelines or of each rubric for each grant opportunity, but more so some things to keep in mind from the reviewer's perspective when submitting your application materials. And last but not least, we want to shoot for taking note of some specific details when it comes to your actual application materials.
We wanted to point out that there's 2 stages of writing a fellowship application or any grant. And the first stage is to respond fully to the instructions that are posted. And then after you feel like you've done a really good job of that, you kind of have to do an about turn and then take the perspective of the reviewer and try to revise, making sure that you've addressed all of the review criteria. And we do want to say a little disclaimer, like that you can do all of the things that we said, but it doesn't necessarily ensure funding. That any grant is there involves some luck in it. So we will hopefully give you a leg up, but we have no guarantees here.
So it's time for a writing exercise already. I know it's early afternoon and we're coming from different places, but sometimes it could be nice to ground ourselves, especially in developing something we'll be using routinely, and that's our elevator speech. So many of you actually sort of shared your elevator speech pretty concisely in your introductions, but let's take 3 minutes to go ahead and think, jot down, whether it's on a notepad or on your phone or whatever you have near, I guess, your laptop, your computer, and jot down, if you're applying to the REAP grant, what is it? What is your project specifically? And travel grant applicants, what is the trip or your virtual conference? Why is it important? Because it's specifically the first thing that a reviewer really wants to know is what is going to be funded. So let's try to make that project and that reason as clear and as feasible as possible. And we'll take just 3 minutes to note that down. We will not be sharing this at this time.
I've recently been reviewing some grant applications that are going to the Department of Education, and the part of this grant is a 10-page narrative on their research. And for all of the people that I've reviewed so far, this is the main issue, is that they're not putting their project or the research questions up at the very top. So this is one way that grant writing varies from most other academic writing. So in a lot of academic writing, you kind of are expected to set the stage for what you're going to do. But reviewers of grants usually are wanting to get through their task very efficiently, and they want to know what's going to be funded. So that really needs to be up at the top of a grant application and needs to be really clear. And then the second thing is that you need to say one thing. So reviewers really need simplicity, and you might have a complex project, or you might have several reasons for traveling to a conference, but you still need to simplify the information and say, just summarize it into one thing. So I want you to take a moment to just summarize your main message in a sentence. Then this is the second place where writing for grants does vary from other kinds of other writing, is that your message needs to be jargon-free and easy to understand. Usually you're writing for people within your department. So you can use words that you would not use when you're talking to like a soccer friend who's not in academia. Your message, so that one statement of either what you want to do or where you're going needs to be jargon-free and easy to understand. So remember, the reviewers are volunteers, and the reviews that you get for this grant are probably going to be from another discipline. It's possible that somebody in philosophy will read a philosophy application, but it's also possible that you will have a reader who's from like biology or from optical sciences. So you really need to make the reviewing easy for them. So just take a minute to circle any word or concept that a reviewer from another discipline might not easily understand.
So one example that we may find in typical grant applications could be something like, I'm traveling to this academic conference to present a poster and to get feedback so that I can turn my poster into a scholarly journal. Another could be, these funds will allow me to recruit 10 people over 80 years in the study, ensuring that the elderly are represented in my data. So again, writing a simple and jargon-free message. Go ahead and take a moment to share that into the chat bar.
So we have one here. I'm applying to the research grant to hire a grad student to help me transcribe some primary sources I have collected from Ottoman Turkish to modern Turkish. So this is a clear sentence, and it's obvious what the money will provide. Oh, so I'm traveling to this lab to learn a method I can apply in my dissertation research. Great, yeah. So those are some really good examples. So secondly, you need to keep the big picture in mind. So you need to emphasize the significance of your project or trip. And one thing that I see often in grant writing is people say, this hasn't been done before, but there's a lot of things in the world that haven't been done before. So that is not enough of significance in a grant application. So you'll be competing against people in all different disciplines, and we've talked about this. Your reviewer might be in a different discipline. So you want to keep in mind that the people who are reading your grant might have a whole different like sort of set of priorities than you have. And so, for example, if you have a competitor who's asking for money for a key part of developing a COVID vaccine that would provide protection for 10 years, or for critical research into cheaply transforming seawater into fresh water, it's hard to compete with those sorts of easily sort of accessible connections to significant issues in the world. So if you are looking for somebody to help you translate from, and I think this is a really good example from Ottoman to modern Turkish, it is hard to compete against people like this, but it is definitely possible. But it's your job to make them see why it's important, and to draw those connections for them. So if you're applying for a travel grant, pretend your competitor is invited to have a coffee with a star in her field at the conference, or she's presenting with a person from the same institution where she's applying for a job. So take a few minutes to write down why your research project or conference is important, and think about these hypothetical examples of other people who have a pretty clear argument at significance. We'll give you just a few minutes to write that down.
We're going to shift gears a little bit and move into discussing your methods and how those tie into and should be connecting and building from your research questions and your project aims. So when looking at the REAP grant specifically, your methods not only need to be clear, but they need to clearly correspond to your research question and to your project aims. A Matryoshki doll may not be a best example here, but that's how my mind thinks of this. You want to make everything connect to each other, or perhaps a thread is a better metaphor, but you want to make sure your methods are actually appropriate for meeting your questions and going to address them, and that those meet your aims, of course. And thinking about your travel grant, it's slightly, but the details of the travel need to be made, need to make sense. It need to be explained thoroughly and succinctly.
And these are really things that are so easy to tell people to do, but they are not necessarily easy to do. My son just finished like a month ago his science fair, middle school science fair project. And I was like, oh, I haven't done like something like this in so long. And it's actually not that simple to have a question that's fully answered through the methods, and then that the methods speak fully to the question. So one of the things that I think is important is to keep revisiting this question as you develop your project, because your project will develop as you go on. And so you need to keep sort of making sure those that the question and methods are speaking to one another. Then the budget in the case of this application, the budget is actually part of your argument. So I'm going to have you put a number in the chat. So the budget is part of telling the reviewers how hard you are working to complete the travel and research, and then also how much you want to do it. So I have 3 examples, and you could put 1, 2, or 3 in here. Who would you want to fund if you had to choose one of these? A student who says they have no other available funds to go to the conference, but is carpooling with a friend and staying with a great aunt when she's attending the conference, or a student who's been awarded a departmental grant for half of a plane ticket, but needs the other half to buy, or funds to buy the other half. We're going to say this is for like some research or something. Or the student who says they have no other available funds and no plans to share a hotel room or any other, or they don't talk about any plans to share a hotel room or other cost-saving measures. Yeah, so 1 or 2, 1, 2. And I think you sort of get the point here. And the reason that I put this in is I've talked to people who are applying to grants and say, well, it's not fair that people who are already partially funded are getting more money. But I think they forget that all of that goes into the whole argument about how much you are working to get other funds, and then how much you really want to do this research. So just keep this in mind as you are creating your budget.
And to continue the argument of making the budget a part of the argument, you also want to make sure that your budget tells your reviewers how organized and prepared you are for that travel and research. So not just about an argument for the travel or the project itself, but for how organized and prepared you are for the resources, that you have the thoroughness in which you have thought it through. So some things to keep in mind for that are making sure your costs are clear, reasonable, and thorough. Oftentimes in the GPSC grant, they ask you to provide rationale for your budget, and the same typically happens in other grant and fellowship applications. Also, you want to make sure that your justification is easy to follow. Sometimes that is a question of aesthetics. How are you bolding or presenting the information using their format, etc. And also, you want to make sure that your project is feasible with the amount of money that you have. So you want it to be proportional to what is expected, what you're saying you're able to do with the amount of money that you are applying for. And I see that Joanna has posted a question about budget, saying, do you mention any reactions or unsuccessful grant applications? Shelley, do you want?
And Erin, you can chime in here, but I would say definitely mention unsuccessful grant applications. So if you have applied to departmental funds or other funds and haven't been successful, I think that it is a good idea to include those. What would you say, Erin?
I agree with that. And then also within the rubric for some of these these grants, we ask you even like any grants you're planning to apply to, like funds you haven't yet received, but like I plan on applying to this department one, but the application cycle is not open, but it'll further help me fund this travel or research. So definitely include anything that will help you pay for your trip or your research.
Yeah, that was a really good question, Joanna, because I know as graduate students, we kind of wonder like, well, if I wasn't awarded, then is it going to be seen as, negative in some way or harming my application? But I think the point that we're trying to drive across is that the more you show that you have worked on it and that you're thinking through different funding avenues, the better it communicates that you're even more serious about solidifying funding for your project or for your travel.
Joanna, does that fully answer your question? Because I wasn't sure about the reactions part. Are you talking like feedback that you've gotten from previous?
That was the typo, meant rejections.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, but it answers. Thank you.
But I know that you have been pretty consistent about applying to stuff. And I think that every reviewer knows, and this is definitely the case for I'm not just talking about these, but other ones too, that that's just part of like grant writing, is that most things are going to be unsuccessful. So it speaks to your persistence when you can list things that you have applied to, and you eventually will get stuff. So there's this statement of faculty support, and these are not required for these grants, but are very helpful. So we have some tips for asking for one, and we can put the link to that in the chat in a little bit. But just some sort of good rules of thumb are giving your writer at least 2 weeks of notice. You want to provide drafts of your statements that you've written so that the faculty can speak clearly about, kind of reinforce your argument. And I would say, even though these are not required, if a reviewer is looking at 2 applications that they think are fairly similar, the fact that you're missing a statement of faculty support is definitely going to play into it. So I think it's fairly important to have these. And one of the things that I often recommend to people who are applying to bigger grants is just to tell your writer that you're going to get everything in early. So like pick a date, maybe 1 to 2 days before the deadline, and say, for my own peace of mind, I'm going to get everything in early. Can you also please try to meet this early deadline? And then if you have everything in and your writer doesn't, at that point, you can be a little more persistent about asking for those letters, because letters are hard to write. Faculty have so much work on them, and these can be things that are pushed to the side. So it is a problem getting letters, and I've known several students for even like bigger grants that their applications haven't been reviewed because of missing letters. So kind of get in the habit of just being really helpful to your writers for writing these letters. Thanks, Alex, for putting that in there.
Yeah, no problem. And just did we skip a slide, Shelley? Is there one more before this?
I think we're good. Yeah.
No, okay. Sorry about that. Well, some final reminders that we want to keep in mind before we turn it over to you all is, it sounds so, again, simple, but literally going through the rubric, the guidelines, and following the instructions to the T. Then, begin drafting your application in a Word document as recommended, and saving those changes. Just I personally just copy and paste the new document and put a new date at the end of it, and then start on that document. It's very helpful. Pretend, like Shelley had just mentioned, that the due date is for March 25th in this case, since the applications, I believe, for REAP and travel this round are April 1st. Erin, please correct me if I am wrong. And also, we want to make sure that you keep in mind to revise with the evaluation rubric in mind. GPSC is wonderful and shares that on their website. So make sure you go through and use that, to draft and develop your materials. And last but not least, have someone who's in your department, maybe not in your department, someone who's maybe scholarly, and someone who's quote unquote, lay, to read and give comments on your draft. Sometimes they're the best comments that we, really need to hear to develop as growing professionals and to feel supported along the journey.
Yeah, so giving yourself an early deadline is really key. So having a complete deadline ahead of time, I think a lot of people aren't funded because they save it for the last minute. And considering these aren't huge grants, but it's a good chunk of money. So it is worth it to you to get things done a few days ahead, have a few people read it and give you feedback, well, maybe a week ahead, and give feedback, and then do your revisions, try to submit a day ahead, and you'll just do a lot better. We all know that, but I want to point out that even though these aren't big grants, they are not dissimilar to a lot of considerably larger grants. And once you do a smaller grant like this, it's not very hard to start thinking about some of the bigger grants that you can apply for. So as we said, Alex and I are from the Office of Fellowships and Community Engagement, and we have a lot of help for you in applying for external funding. We have a grad funding newsletter, and that is a list of current opportunities that you can apply for. And then we have, on our website, we have tips for looking for funding. And then we also have a summer fellowship application development program. And what that is a series of deadlines over the summer. So if you find something that you might want to apply for, and usually the deadlines are in the fall for those bigger ones, we'll give you deadlines over the summer. Actually, Joanna, you have been involved with this. Do you want to tell us from your perspective?
Yeah, so yeah, no, I was really grateful for this opportunity. I participated last summer, and they helped me. One, they paired me with a very awesome mentor. I already forgot their name, but they were in a different discipline. I think they were in the sciences. So it was nice to get a different perspective from a person, a different, jargon-based kind of environment. And he was really helpful in helping me edit old application that I had, which unfortunately due to the pandemic had to change my research design. So I didn't end up submitting it because I was doing in-person interviews about like Honduran food and I dealt with making meals and stuff like that. So he was really helpful in helping me organize that, because my initial application was really jargon heavy and very abstract. So he helped me kind of make things more concrete and help with the organization of my paper. So it was really helpful to have that kind of one-on-one peer support. And I think we had like 3 writing deadlines within like a month each in between. Yep. So it was also nice for my own writing discipline of not doing things last minute, because I am one of those last minute folks who struggle busting.
Who isn't?
Right?
Yeah.
You have 10,000 things.
Yeah.
But I would totally recommend folks who haven't used this opportunity to use the summer fellowship development program for that, or even like bigger grants. I think like help with the NSF and all the other ones, but I totally recommend it.
Thanks. Yeah. So we know the summer gets busy and it's hard to set deadlines for yourself. So this is kind of the point of it. And as Joanna was saying, we do have people who will talk with you about your ideas and help you develop your application. We also have writing efficiency sessions, and there's 2 a week, one Wednesday and one on Friday. And you can find that on the Grad Center website. And what these are just times for you to sit down and write. And I think it's a good idea. Like if you want to say, okay, I'm just going to spend Friday morning working on my application, these will just help keep you focused on that one thing for, you can go for as long, they last for 3 hours, but you can go for as long as you want. If you want to drop in for 20 minutes, you can. Or if you want to stay for 2 hours, that's fine too. So Alex, do you want to mention anything else about the writing efficiency sessions?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Joanna, for your sharing your experiences about the summer application development program. And Joanna is also part of WES. So you're doing a lot, and I know everyone is, but I don't personally know you all. But I am one of the facilitators for WES. And I will say, in addition to what Shelley shared, I think that this is really for me as another doctoral candidate, for me to not only sit down and write, but to really cultivate that habit of writing and prioritizing that professional development for me personally. So it's not only just sitting down and getting, sorry, it's very windy. It's not only just about sitting and getting that writing done, but about really working towards those goals of getting the whole project completed and cultivating that habit of getting it in, even if it is only for 20 minutes.
All right, I'm going to stop share and stop recording, and we'll talk about any questions.